All right, let's jump right into this thing. How far apart are the firing events in degrees of crankshaft rotation on a 6-cylinder engine? I'll tell you how you do that. A firing event means how many, we're actually measuring in degrees of crankshaft rotation, right? Okay, how many degrees of crankshaft rotation do you have in a engine that's 4-cycle? A 4-stroke cycle engine, excuse me. 720 degrees. It's going to turn 2 full turns. You got that? The reason it has to turn 2 full turns is why? The piston's got to go up and down 2 times to make this happen, right? You know, it's pulling the air in, it squeezes the air, you got a firing event, and then it goes back. So how much distance is there between firing events? It's going to depend on how many cylinders you have. And on a 6-cylinder engine, how many you got?
Okay, 720 divided by 6.
Huh?
Take 720 divided by 6.
Yeah, 720 divided by 6.
That's what I said.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you right. Talk loud so we can hear you. What? 120 degrees, right?
Yes.
120 degrees. How about a 4-cylinder?
180.
180 degrees. How about an 8-cylinder?
90.
What about a 10-cylinder?
72.
72 degrees. Isn't that something? All right, now then, what does the oxygen sensor sense?
Oxygen.
Now, what were we talking about the other day? The oxygen sensor, remember I showed you guys on the scope. I heated the oxygen sensor up. You saw it going up. When I had the flame on the oxygen sensor, where was the pattern? It was up high, wasn't it? When I moved the flame and there was oxygen there, it went down, right? Okay, now then, one of the things that I was telling Wes the other day that sort of tripped him up when we were talking, we actually plugged in the last week, we hooked up the exhaust gas analyzer and we hooked it up to the vehicle, and I said, okay, on an exhaust gas analyzer, we're measuring 4 gases with the analyzer we got. There are actually 5 gases that you're dealing with when you're talking about emissions. One of them is what? What's the most important gas that we're measuring?
CO2.
CO2, yeah, and CO2 is good. It is our friend. It makes the trees green and all this kind of thing. The people that are talking about going green and all, if the trees could get them around the throat, they'd probably choke them because they're wanting to cut the trees' air supply off. Because the trees in the grass like CO2. But we're actually being hammered into exactly like water vapor is bad and all kinds of stuff. You know, water vapor and CO2 is what comes out of car exhaust. And I told that story one time about this guy that was parking his 78 Ford truck in his chicken house and letting it idle to kill a bunch of chickens. And he would. I mean, he had he'd collect some kind of insurance payoff if he killed 10,000 chickens or something. If there was no way they could tell that he killed them. So he'd back them in there and he'd just let it run, kill the dadgum chickens. And he'd say, hey, but the chickens died. Then you get a big insurance payoff. It's cheating, you know what I'm saying? Well, he buys his 2003 F-150 and he tries that with it. And he comes over fussing at the salesman at the dealership. He said, I don't like this truck because it won't kill my chickens. He said, I let that burn half a tank of gas out of that thing in that chicken house. And all them chickens still running around just fine. Didn't kill a single one of them. See what I'm saying? If it don't kill them little bitties, it ain't going to hurt us. You see where I'm going? In a closed environment. And then one guy was talking about trying to kill himself. He put his car in the garage, pulled the door down, cranked it up, burned a tank of gas out. He just sort of dozed off. He woke up with a headache and empty tank of gas. He's mad as all get out because he couldn't kill himself. Right? All right. I'm serious. That's a true story. You know, they were talking about that at Ford School. Okay, now then. So let's move on here. Oxygen sensor senses oxygen. If you kill a cylinder, like I was telling Wes the other day, I said, what if I kill the spark so the spark plug's not firing? What's my oxygen sensor going to show me? Is it going to show rich or lean? It's going to go so lean because it doesn't smell fuel. I've sat in classes where professional mechanics miss that question. I'm talking about classes with other guys when I was going to school and all, and somebody would say something about that, and they say, well, it's going to read rich because of all that fuel in there. Well, an oxygen sensor smelling oxygen, it's not smelling gas. They don't even know about the gas. All it knows, it can decide whether the mixture is lean or rich.
I want to know, does the wideband sense all of that?
Mm-hmm. A wideband sensor is it can actually measure in a lot of different, wider range.
But it only senses oxygen still?
Yeah.
Okay.
And basically it's got to go, it runs between 11 and 1400 degrees. It's real hot, you know, on that one. How does the powertrain control module control the amount of fuel delivered to the cylinders on the fuel injection engine?
Through the mass airflow sensor, throttle position sensor.
How about pulse width of the injectors? In other words, the injectors, whenever your engine is running, your crankshaft sensor is actually giving it speed, right? So and it goes click, 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 click. And the injectors, if you're listening to the injectors, you'll hear them go click, 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 click when it's idling. And as you gas it up, they go click, 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 click. They go faster, but the speed of the injectors clicking is not as significant as how long the injectors open when they open. You see what I'm saying? They got a window in there, so they got a pulse width. actually a pulse width of how many milliseconds that injector is open. And you remember the pattern that we showed you guys? Whenever you got you're basically, I'll show you what we're doing here. We got an injector here, and we got two wires going to that injector. And down here we got the amount of time that injector is energized is going to have to do with how much fuel goes out. Okay, your PCM, let me get a marker that's better. Your PCM is right over here, and this one here is going to B plus. Most vehicles. Now there's very, very, very few exceptions to this, but on like the older Jeeps, like 87 and 90, they had the B plus being toggled. But on just about every vehicle you'll find the negative speed is going to be coming from the PCM. All right. Now then, what you're going to do is if you tie in right here, going to that injector with your scope, right? All right, you're going to hook this up to your scope. This is your scope pattern. All right, you're going to see 12 volts whenever the injector is not energized. This is 0 volts. And you're going to see it pull down to 0 volts. And the length of this line right here is going to tell you how long that injector is open. And when it releases the injector, you remember how we talked yesterday about how when magnetism sweeps across those windings, it makes a spike, right? Okay, it's going to make voltage. Okay, so you got a spike here, and then it tapers off back to 12 volts again, which I did that wrong. All right, so that's what that's going to look like. The amount of time this injector is open, when I give it gas, boom, we were over here on this test board doing this the other day, and what happened over here when we gave it throttle, this got wider. Got it? That's what happens. Your injector pulse can actually be really narrow or really wide, depending on whether it needs more fuel. If it needs more fuel, the baseline reading that it gets is I'm going to operate the injectors at this frequency, click, 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 click. Now what it also does while I'm thinking about it, and I'll forget this if I don't say it now, when you apply the throttle, it adds some extra squirts. It adds some extra clicks to that injector when you're applying throttle. It doesn't just extend the pulse width. The injectors are going click, 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 and if you're listening really close or if you've got it showing up on a square wave graph, while you're applying the throttle, it's doing the little accelerator pump thing. It'll go bzzz. It'll buzz the injector because it needs that extra fuel on a fuel-injected engine, just like it did on one that had a carburetor. All right. When you're spinning it over, it's going to fire the injectors all at once, and then when it fires up, it's going to fire them with the firing order. Got that? Now, I told you guys the other day about this guy, this car that was really hard to start. It was a Nissan Altima, a 97 model. And this guy worked on it and spent about $500 of the lady's money and couldn't figure out why it wouldn't start, and it had a blown fuse. Actually, it had a fuse that was missing because it didn't know that it was spinning. So watch for that. You know, if you got an Altima that's hard to start, look at fuse. I think it's fuse. The pin on the PCM is 20, I think. It's got to see power when you turn it to start, so it'll go to fire all the injectors. And if that doesn't see power there, it's going to be hard to start, and that's what we're all learning. Somebody had yanked a fuse, I think, and put it somewhere else when the radio fuse blew. And all I did was put a fuse back there and boom, she fixed right up. See, and it's a lot of that's surgical repair. See what I mean? You hear somebody talk about my nephew can take a car apart and put it back together from one end to the other. That ain't mechanic work, is it? That's not. I mean, that's actually mechanic work is when you know which screw to tighten to fix a big problem. I mean, that's basically what we're trying to learn around here. All right, so. And that leads to question number 4. How is fuel delivery during engine starting different from fuel delivery right after the engine starts? It fires all the injectors, boom, 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 while you're spinning it over, and it fires them just with a little, in other words, it fires them in sequence with the firing order after the engine fires up. Now, there are exceptions to that. The Bronco out there is bank fired. The front 2 injectors on the left bank and the back 2 injectors on the right bank fire together, and the other 4 fire together. So it's only got 2 banks. Come on in here, Jeremy Williamson. We're doing the what do you know? Open up, flip open to your what do you know engine performance test. Right? Well, when the engine load goes up, where does engine vacuum go? Wait a minute. Why do you have engine vacuum to begin with? The throttle plate's closed. The pistons are trying to pull air in. They're pulling against the throttle plate that's closed. You're going to have really low pressure in your manifold when the throttle closed. You open the throttle, vacuum's going up. What's healthy vacuum on an idling engine? I'm not talking about one with your high ground cam in it, huh?
20 to 15.
Yeah, 15 to 20, usually 18 to 21, I think is what most of your books will tell you. And that's why your vacuum gauge has got a little green range there. All right, now, if I gas it, if I open the throttle, the vacuum's going to drop and go back up. Even if I open the throttle and hold it, it's going to drop and go right back up into the green. That's what it's supposed to do. So pay attention to that engine vacuum. And what they did was, what used engine vacuum before fuel injection came along?
Oh, really?
How about the trans... Huh?
I was going to say brake.
Yeah, the brakes did. That's a good point. Brakes actually used it to help assist. Well, for sensing, the transmissions used it so they'd know when to hold the gears. The modulator valve, like a 350 turbo hydromatic, and it would actually, when you were deep into the throttle and the vacuum was low, it would hold the gears longer. And it was using that vacuum percent. So low vacuum, remember, you can remember that by if you pull a vacuum line, or like somebody will put a transmission in a put an engine or transmission or something in a truck, and they'll pinch that vacuum line or forget to hook it up or something like that, and the transmission shifts really late and really hard because they didn't plug that vacuum into the modulator. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if it's got a modulator, not all of them have that, but the ones that did. Okay, let's see. When engine load goes up, engine vacuum goes down. Vacuum going down means it's going to go closer to atmospheric pressure. When engine and air temperatures are cold, the air-fixed fuel mixture must be what? Richer. Think about the choke on a carburetor. I know a lot of you guys, the hot rod guys and the guys that drive old cars are familiar with carburetors, but whenever you get in a car with a carburetor, what's the first thing you got to do? Huh? Yeah, you tap the gas at least once. I mean, that's typically at least once you're going to tap the gas. What happens when you tap the gas?
Primes it.
You're wetting the manifold. That's right. You're priming it. And what else happens? The choke goes dunk. You can see that on this 350 we got out here. You hit the gas, the choke goes dunk. You crank it up, and within 90 seconds, that choke ought to be straight up and down. It'll be wide open. However, right after it starts up, there's a choke pull-off that opens at about 1/8 of an inch. Yeah, and that lets it get a little. And so, if if that doesn't happen, a lot of what we did when I was working on carburetors was related to setting the choke up. You know what I mean? Make sure that the choke was working just exactly like it's supposed to, because it's got a little spiral spring in there and all. Anyway, as you apply throttle and increase engine speed with no load, what does the ignition spark timing do? It advances, and that's with no load. I have actually, when you're driving down the road at about 50 miles an hour, 55, and you're holding your speed, the ignition timing, when you're just in a float, can be up to 50, 60 degrees before top dead center. Now, why does it need to advance the engine? Why does it need to advance the ignition timing as the engine picks up speed? Why does it need? That gas only burns so fast. And you want that explosion to happen at the point to where it's going to give you the most punch, right? Now, if you retard the ignition timing, it's going to run like a dog. It's going to go, it's terrible. How many of you have ever driven a carbureted car in the mountains? One that was set up for sea level. It's horrible. If you're driving, like I had a 72 Chevrolet I really liked. One of those with the inside-out back windshield. It was really cool. And I drove that car, and I went to the mountains. And the rim of the Grand Canyon is 8,000 feet above sea level. Most people wouldn't think that, but it is. The rim of the Grand Canyon is a really high altitude. And driving around up there, you didn't hardly even get out of your own way. Now, what they'd have to do is they got to set it up with it. They got to advance the ignition timing some more and change the air fuel mixture. And they can't. They set them up for altitude. Now, your fuel-injected engines can operate perfectly normally from sea level all the way up to your 4,000 feet without having to have any modification. Typically, that's the way it used to be. They may have gone farther than that now, but anyway. So it's going to happen sooner. The spark is going to happen sooner. And you can actually see that. How many of you guys have pointed a timing light at a balancer and pulled it and revved it up with the light flashing? You see the timing advance? Right? The timing's going to advance. What's meant by closed loop fuel control? I'm sorry. Late valve timing, late ignition timing, and EGR flow all have the same effect on engine vacuum. What's that? The engine vacuum goes lower when you've got late valve timing, which would mean your camshaft is out of time to the late side, late ignition timing, and EGR flow. Did you know that if your timing belt is a tooth off in the other direction, it can actually cause the engine to burn oil?
How?
Because what it does is the valves close while the piston's still going down.
When it pulls all up?
Pulls all up. Yeah, and that happens. There was a guy named Richard Sheffield, who was a really good instructor that came here when Carport used to be up over where Advance is, he would come and they teach a compression class here. I've got the little book that he did, and yeah.
What was 8?
Huh? Oh, 8 was actually it lowers engine vacuum. In other words, if yours the engine vacuum lower, EGR is flowing, late valve time and late ignition time and low engine vacuum, right? And that's going to make one run ridge. And I can tell you a story or two about that too. But Richard Sheffield was here, and he had his vacuum weave analyzer, and he had I had this old Honda car that I had here back then. It was a low 87 Honda Accord. And he'd never seen that car before. He just said, "You got a car right here that runs?" I said, "Yeah, I'll pull that Honda right here." So he pulled it right here, hooked the vacuum waveform analyzer up, fired it up. He looked at it, he listened to it run, he looked at the back, he saw some smoke coming out in the back. He looked at his vacuum waveform on the computer, and he said, "This thing's a tooth out of time." Just looking at that. He hadn't laid a wrench on it other than to hook his equipment up. You see what I'm saying? All right, so that's good diagnostication. You know what? I didn't know if he was right or not, but I know that after, when we got on into engine repair the semester after that, and I had my guys pull those covers off and look at the timing, and it was a tooth out, just like he said. And he was looking at a waveform analyzer and all that. But anyway, so let me sit here and look at. I'm going to tell you something else. Let me tell you something right quick. You're going to get to the point to where you've had enough success in the field to where you feel like you know about as much as anybody out there. That's nonsense. I don't care how much you know. There's a heck of a lot you don't know. You know what I mean? I mean, and I was the first one to tell you that. I mean, I've written articles for magazines for 10, 11 years, and I've done all kinds of stuff, and I worked in this business 36 years. But there's a ton of stuff that I don't know. You know what I mean? Now, you can actually perform. You can figure things out. You can gather information. You can fix just about anything if you got the right attitude. But one of the things that being a good technician, somebody that's had a lot of success in the field, you sort of have a tendency to get proud. You know what I mean? And what happens when that happens is you wind up getting your plow cleaned. And there was a guy that was taking his certified training exams, and he was so cocky that he said he didn't even need technical service bulletins. And everybody in the room was rolling their eyes at that, you know, because anybody with any good sense is going to look up technical service bulletins, because you'll find a problem that quick that you'd look for all day if you didn't have that TSB. So don't ever get. Oh, and also when you get to be really good at fixing cars, it doesn't give you a license to be a jerk. See what I'm saying?
Wow.
Treat everybody with respect. You see what I'm saying? Always give everybody the benefit of the doubt, you know. All right, now then, here we got. What's meant by closed loop fuel control?
Would mean that the O2 sensors either are or ain't paying attention.
Yes, exactly. You've been listening. Whenever it's paying attention to the oxygen sensor, that means you're in a closed loop. Jacob, do you know this system here? And this is the way I talk about this. My wristwatch is an open loop system. It's real complicated, but it's open loop. It doesn't know if it's right or wrong. I can set this watch to London time. I can set it to where it's totally wrong. I can set it to where it's 30 minutes fast. It don't have a clue. But a closed loop system would be like a watch that has that talks to the atomic clock up there. These atomic watches that will set themselves. That's a closed loop system. That air conditioner is a closed loop system. When the temperature gets down, it's going to turn off the air. Yeah, everything. Your phone's a closed loop system. It has the ability to look out there. Okay, just remember that. Closed loop, it means that there is a feedback that tells the computer how it's doing, right? There's a perfectly good example of a closed loop system on that engine right there. The EGR has got a little delta pressure feedback EGR sensor, and whenever the computer tells that little vacuum solenoid to open the EGR valve, it knows whether the EGR is flowing like it wants it to or not by looking at that feedback sensor. And that way it can make adjustments and it keeps everything balanced. You see what I'm saying? It's really important we keep our air fuel balanced so that we'll have a lot of CO2 and not much of anything else. Our CO2, we need it high. We need our oxygen. We need our CO. We need our hydrocarbons. And we need our oxides of nitrogen to be low. And we'll talk more about that stuff when we get into emissions. Carburetor set an accelerator pump that applied additional fuel charge through squirt jets as the throttle was open. How does a fuel injection engine handle the need? I talked about that a minute ago. Extra injector squirts. And you can see that. I was noticing that years ago when I looked at the graphs on the SBDS machine that when you give it the gas, you'd see extra squirt. Because it would have a little square wave. In other words, it wasn't just showing you a scope pattern. It would have you a little square wave every time the injector's open. It would give you a little squirt. It would give you a little square wave indication. Okay, why is it a good idea to check tire pressures on a vehicle while you're performing what customers in shops usually call a tune-up?
Because tire pressure is important.
Well, yeah, because also, think about this. Sally Mae, she's been driving her car around here with the tires half flat on it for no telling how long. And it's going to feel sort of sluggish, and it's not going to be as crisp on its acceleration and all that. Well, she says, can you do me a tune-up? You say, sure, no problem. So you go ahead and you clean the throttle body, and you put spark plugs in it, and you make sure everything's working right, check engine vacuum, and you do your, scan tool business to make sure. And you do, if you've got the ease diagnostic system I got out here, you do a system health check. Let the engine run through all this stuff, and you find out. Well, when you get through with all of that, you go ahead and you bring her tire pressures from 18 pounds up to 32. And now when she drives this thing, it's going to be crisp, and it's going to take off better. It's going to handle better. She goes, man, that tune-up made a heck of a big difference. If you just check the stuff, you know what I mean? I'll tell you something else that's really important too. If you're really good at what you do and you want to be doing a good job, check the tire pressure in the spare if it's not a lot of trouble. Now, if they got their trunk loaded with camping equipment, and you obviously can't get to it, but if it's easy to get to the spare, and you can, I'm not saying lower it on the trucks that have it under. If you can get to that valve stem, check that tire pressure in the spare. Because most of the time, you'd be surprised how many of them are driving around with a flat spare. Because they ain't touched it in years, and it's the molecular bleed through is let it go away, and you can air it back up. And when you air up the spare, if it calls for 32, put about 40 in it, because it's going to be a long time before anybody checks it.
Like my spare doesn't fit my truck more.
Huh?
My spare doesn't fit my tires more.
Well, how come?
Because I have a 14-inch spare with 15-inch tires.
Well, you can still change the tire.
Use it like a donut.
Why is it a bad idea to ignore the malfunction indicator light even if you know what's wrong and it's not a serious problem?
Because problems can stack up on top of it.
You sure will. Problems pile up on top of that. All right. Now, as quick as we can, we're going to blow through these other tests here.